Again, we're excited that it's Youth Sunday, and I hope you guys will get a chance to talk to these guys after the service as well. Thanks.
Gracious and loving God, we come today in worship to celebrate your work in our lives and the lives of those around us. We thank you for sustaining us and giving us grace through the cross of Christ. Please help us to be a people that brings honor and glory to you and not ourselves. Help us to follow your will so that a dark world might see your light. We pray for those in our congregation who are dealing with illness, that you would continue to your work to healing hands in their recovery. We pray for all those affected by the recent hurricanes, and that you will be with the first responders, volunteers, and victims. Thank you, God, for hearing our prayers and teaching us how to pray through what Christ taught us, the apostles saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
Upon the mountain my Lord spoke, out of his mouth came fire and smoke. Looked all around me, it looked so fine, till I asked my Lord if it was mine.
Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
The Jordan River is chilly and cold. It chills the body, but not the soul. There ain't but one train upon this track. It runs to heaven and then right back.
Every time I feel the Spirit, time I feel I must be yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, I will pray.
When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you by the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?
And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did to the one of the least of these my brothers, you need it to me." And then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared from the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they will also answer, saying, "Lord, when did I see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and I did not minister you?" And then he will answer to them, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do to the one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will not go into the eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.
Good morning. Try that one more time. Good morning. There we go. Awesome. So this morning when I was getting dressed to come here, few choices going, which bow tie to wear, which pair of suspenders to wear. But actually the one that gave me the most trouble was which pair of socks I should pick. I have different pairs of dress socks. If any of you sock fanatics out there understand, sometimes it's a little bit of a difficult decision, even if people don't end up seeing them. I actually ended up going with the Star Wars socks, if you can see them. Any Star Wars fans out there? There we go. I personally am a huge Star Wars fan. I've heard people say that, Disney is ruining Star Wars, it's a money grab, things like that. Me, being a Star Wars fan, I'll take a movie every year for sure, just because it's a new thing to enjoy each and every year when it comes out. My Star Wars fandom actually goes back to pretty early days of my childhood. I was probably either the age of 3 or 4 when my dad first gave me the original trilogy box set on VCR. And not a huge gift or anything like that, but looking at it a little bit more metaphorically now, I can thank him for giving me Star Wars, because those videos, kids grow up watching TV shows and everything. I grew up watching TIE fighters whiz by in space, Luke Skywalker going on adventures, and that's something that, to me, in a smaller way, not as important as other things, but it has shaped me into who I am today. Star Wars is a big part of my life, and if my dad didn't give me that, then I would be a little bit different growing up and then for the rest of my life. So Star Wars, while it's not really important thing, it is something that was a gift to me that changed my life. So quick thing before we go into our scripture today, I want to point out something. Don't want to point out that I spoke about Luke Skywalker before Jesus in the sermon. We're going to pretend that didn't happen. But I want to point out something real quick, and that is my age. When I was first asked to come up here to prepare something for y'all, I was a little nervous, but most of that came from the lack of credibility that an 18-year-old would have speaking in front of all of you. I was a little nervous about that, but I soon realized, thankfully, that the credibility from what I'm about to say for the next few minutes isn't necessarily going to have to come from me, but rather this. And if we all know that there is no age requirement to read this, then we know that we can get information from it. And no matter who's up here speaking, this is a good word that we can live by. So we're going to go ahead and open up. If you guys want to follow along, you can. But we're going to start in Matthew chapter 19, and we are going to go to Matthew 10, and we are going to go to verse 39. This is a good example of what some people call a life verse. If you ever heard that expression used, I guess people can use it to talk about their favorite verse, something that they can dedicate their life towards. For me, Matthew 10:39 is a beautiful example of something we can live by. From paraphrase from my memory that I've used it so many times, Matthew 10:39 says, Jesus is saying, "If you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give your life up for me, you will find it." And so we know that Jesus, while oftentimes he will say things that we could take literally, sometimes there is a hidden meaning behind things a little bit more metaphorical. So we talked about giving our life for something. I don't think that necessarily means, taking a bullet for somebody, but rather, a little bit more in depth. What does giving our life for something look like? what things in our life can we give? What does that look like? So we're going to start today talking about different things that we can give in our lives. And while the Bible has numerous examples of all sorts of giving, Old Testament and New Testament, there's one in particular that it hones in on that I want to highlight today, and that is money. If you didn't know, money is mentioned upwards of 2,000 times in the Bible. And just to put that into relative terms, Jesus actually speaks more about money and about wealth, and that idea of money and wealth, more than he talks about love, which to me blew my mind just because of that's such an important topic to him. But even more curiously, I thought Jesus talks more about money than he talks about heaven and hell combined. So while this is sometimes a touchy topic to speak about, people consider their economic status a bit more of a private thing, Jesus goes straight to the point with lots of things. So we're going to look in today a little bit as to how he looks at money and then different aspects of that. But before we go into another form of dialogue from Jesus, we're actually going to go take a step back into the Old Testament. Lots of times when we talk about different messages, we stick to the New Testament, we stick to Jesus' teaching as a way that we can derive information from. But the Old Testament's still there and it's still important. The Old Testament, it is what it is. It's a collection of stories from real people, real places, real events that did actually happen that we can learn from, their experiences. And so we're going to start in Proverbs. We're not going to be in the Old Testament very long, but there are 3 truths in Proverbs that stood out to me in terms of talking about wealth that I wanted to highlight real quick before we go into the New Testament, that we can look in Proverbs to see characteristics of wealth, namely how important it is. So Proverbs 8:10, if you bear with me, I'm going to rattle through a couple verses real quick. But Proverbs 8:10 says, "Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you desire may not compare with her." So it says, my instruction instead of silver, my knowledge instead of gold. It says that wisdom is more important than wealth. It's what's highlighted in this verse in Proverbs. Next verse in Proverbs, Proverbs 11, verse 4. "Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death." So righteousness is something that can deliver us from death, not necessarily riches. Likewise, in Proverbs 11, verse 28, it says, "Whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf." So we see that the righteous will flourish. The righteous will be delivered from death. It is seen that righteousness is more important than wealth. So we have wisdom, we have righteousness. In Proverbs 15:16, it says, "Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it." So better is fear of the Lord than any sort of riches. Likewise, Proverbs 22:4 says, "The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life." So it actually compares humility to riches, metaphorically. So we see here that humility is more important than wealth. So before we go into the New Testament to see what Jesus is telling us, we see in Proverbs that wisdom and righteousness and humility are all different things that we can say is more important than wealth. Most of us already knew that. Hopefully we already knew that. But we can go ahead and go into the New Testament again. So we already know that Jesus gives us instruction through different forms of parables, through his dialogue. But this instruction is to direct us how to live our lives in a way that is worthy of eternity. Jesus isn't just speaking with empty words. He's trying to direct us towards a goal. And that goal is entering the kingdom of heaven. So all of his words, all of his parables, while they have different meanings, they're on different subject matters, they're all directing us towards living a life that is worthy of eternity. And while that's not necessarily possible for any regular human, only that's possible with the perfection of the life that Jesus lived, we can still strive for it. We're still striving to listen to his word. So while we listen to different words that talk about service, talk about all these different things, when he talks about money, it's not something that we should just shy away from, even if it is a touchy subject matter. So we're going to go ahead and go into Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. He says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, For where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. So that last sentence may be familiar to you guys. You might have heard it before, that where our treasure is, our heart will be also. What we do with our money shows maybe where our heart is. You know, what we indulge in might be what our heart is. And whether that be service and donations and charity, usually where our money goes, our heart also goes with that. But I want to also highlight the beginning portion of this verse, that Jesus says that there are two different types of treasures. The two different types of treasures that he highlights are the earth treasures, the temporary treasures. These treasures we cannot keep, something that we all know, that when we die, wherever we're going, we can't take a sports car with us. I know it would be great to drive up to heaven in a nice Lamborghini, but it's not something that's possible. So we have two types of treasures, the earth treasures that are temporary, that we cannot keep. And then we have the eternal treasures, the treasures that we cannot lose, the treasures that we have in heaven. So he's comparing these two different types of treasures already. And a quote that I thought went along with this beautifully, John Wesley, of course you guys already know him, John Wesley said, "I value all things only by the price they shall gain in eternity." He values all things only by the price they shall gain in eternity. So, real quick, I want to go ahead and press the pause button. Because if you guys are wondering, Ethan, why are you up here as an 18-year-old who hasn't been in the real world yet, hasn't had a job, probably doesn't have to pay that many taxes? Why am I up here talking about money to a group of grown adults who've probably been more into the real world than I am? Well, I will go ahead and say this, that what John Wesley says about valuing things based off of what they'll give us in heaven, I'm not going to come up here and pretend that I live by that perfectly. I don't quite frankly think that anybody lives by that perfectly. I go to QT in the summers to get slushies, and I know for sure that a Mountain Berry Blast does not give me anything in heaven. But Jesus still shows us and speaks to us saying that that isn't something that we should indulge in. And he's not doing that to put QT out of business, I promise. I don't think there's any sort of bad blood there. But rather, he's doing it out of compassion for us. He's trying to get the best for us. And while sometimes we get, a little excited over the idea of all these possessions that we can have on earth, he's trying to show us that we're not going to have this forever. This isn't something that we should try and hoard up as much as we can. It's dangerous. Rather, we should look at what we can have in heaven. Rather, we should look at what we can experience in heaven. And so it's an important concept that Jesus talks about. And when he says the two different types of treasures, he actually means two different types of perspectives. And so when Jesus talks about these two different types of perspectives, one is a short-sighted perspective. And we talk about how we use our money. One is short-sighted. It's focused on the things of earth. And it's concerning yourself with where you will be in a few years. A few years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. However much more time you have here on earth, that is the short-sighted perspective that Jesus is telling us. That we're using our money to put us in a good position while we're here. Maybe we can live the American dream of possibly getting rich, having a yacht, living maybe in another country, something luxurious. But that is the short-sighted perspective that he's warning us we shouldn't live into. Whereas we also have the far-sighted perspective. This perspective focuses on the things of heaven, and it concerns us with where we will be in a few million years. Now, I can't come up here and tell you which you should value more than the other, because that's your own decision. But what Jesus is trying to say, that we shouldn't just look at this and say, would we rather have possessions here that we can see, that we can touch, that we can enjoy, or there is another side of this. There is something that when we enter the kingdom of heaven, there will be riches beyond our imagination. That it is written that heaven is unlike any sort of reality we will ever experience. And that we can't just pretend that, we're not going to be able to have things like sports cars and slushies and things that we can indulge into now. Because in heaven, it's going to be all the better, and we're going to be with God. So, these two perspectives. Now, I was trying to explain this concept to my parents before I came up here to speak, just to kind of practice and go through with it. This isn't necessarily me coming up here and telling you guys, shame on you for having a 401k. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say, though, is that there are two different sort of philosophical points here. You can either have the more, easily translatable to reality. You can have a big savings account of, worldly possessions on earth that, you can see, you can touch, you can feel, you can enjoy. You can save up your life for a yacht, for an expensive, luxurious lifestyle, or something that maybe not all of us think about all too often. We can save up our savings account in heaven. And what does that mean? Well, Jesus, in the collection of verses that Abby and Elena came up here to read, Jesus is very clear with the way that when we go up to the kingdom of heaven, when we are at the gates and God separates us onto two different sides, whether or not we gave to the needy or whether or not we neglected to. That isn't necessarily talking about money. It includes other opportunities to give, and we will highlight those in a second. But when we talk about our money, we talk about how all of us as North Americans, we are in the top 1 or 2% in the world. And whether we are struggling financially, I'm not going to say shame on you for not giving or anything like that. But the definition, I think operationally defined as a global poor, it is living under the income of $1.90 a day. So we can say that we are in, not necessarily as rich as some other people. None of us are Elon Musk in here. I don't think Elon Musk is in here. But that doesn't mean that we aren't considered globally rich. And the fact that we have the capacity to give is something that we can share with others. So I'm not necessarily saying to give up your 401k. I'm not necessarily saying shame on you for having a savings account. Because I'm up here, I have an iPhone in my pocket, I'm wearing dress shoes. I'm already richer than most of the world. And the fact that I do have an iPhone shows you that instead of giving that money, I do have an iPhone. And this is something that we can struggle with as often as we try to prevent it for the rest of our lives. That it is unpreventable for us to be able to enjoy the things of this world. But we do need to take a look at what we can enjoy in heaven. So the two different perspectives we have put two different things on the throne of our lives. We have a life of materialism. While it is physically appealing, while it is nice to think about having a yacht, while it is nice to drink Mountain Berry Blast slushies in the middle of the summer, it's physically appealing, but it's also spiritually appalling. And what Jesus talks about with indulging in luxuries when others don't have necessities, that's something we should think about. So it's physically appealing, but it's spiritually appalling, and it puts money on the throne of our lives. We also have the opposite. We have a lifestyle lived out of generosity. And while generosity is a sacrifice, it's something that we do have to give up a portion of ourselves, giving up our life, as Jesus said in Matthew 10:39, giving up our life so we can find it. We are giving up something. It is a sacrifice, but at the same time, this is something that I thought was really neat. It is also selfishly selfless. Selfishly selfless. And so by that, I mean that while we are being selfless, while we are giving to others that are in need, we are being selfless with our money, there is also something to it for us. And oftentimes, when anyone asks us to do something, whether it be Jesus or our parents, whenever we're trying to make our bed or anything like that, we ask, what is in it for me? That is the human response. We are always going to ask that. But when we ask Jesus, what is in it for me, when he instructs us with something, he smiles and he can tell us that he has the most beautiful gift imaginable for what is in it for us, and that is salvation. And while this may be a difficult thing to try and live our lives by, and while he might ask us something that is, something that we might struggle with, we can strive towards it because what is in it for us is salvation. It is the most wonderful gift that we could possibly imagine. So, it is selfish in the way that we are getting something back, but at the same time, it is selfless. We are being humbly selfish while we are being selfless with our money. So, we talked about money. We talked about why it is dangerous to think about hoarding our money into luxuries. But at the same time, we need to look at other aspects of giving too. Because while we do have the capacity to give monetarily, we all know that is not the only way we can give. And I'm not going to even come up here and try and tell you that it is the most important way we should give. We have different forms of giving, and one of the most important ways is service. And I wanted to shout out our church's program we have here called the Great Day of Service. If you've ever been a part of it, you can raise your hand. And if not, if your hand is down, it happens every year in springtime, I believe. And it is amazing in the way that there are so many different fields that you can go into to serve others. And while you can serve others with your money, while you can give something for yourself, for the benefit of another person, for the kingdom, for God, for uplifting his name, you can also give service. You can give service to somebody else. You can uplift them. You can uplift God's name. Do it out of love. There are many other forms too. We have prayer. With the hurricanes that happened both in Florida and in Texas, maybe not all of us could give monetarily. And that isn't a bad thing. That isn't saying that, if you can't give X amount of dollars, then shame on you. We don't need to quantify giving. You can still give prayer. These people that maybe had their houses destroyed, had their cities flooded, had their possessions wiped away, that isn't something that you can replace very well. And with money, that isn't going to replace all of the aspects of their life that was washed away by the flooding and the hurricanes. But a prayer that can lift them up is priceless. It's something that we can't quantify. So we give through money, we give through service, we give through prayer. We can give through love as well. And what Jesus is trying to tell us, when we give our life so we can find it, we give our life so we can earn salvation. He isn't saying that you should give all your money yet still not love, still not pray, still not give service. He's trying to get you to think past money, think past service, think past love. He wants you to give part of yourself to others so that they can benefit, and ultimately, you will earn salvation. Now, we know now what we should give, why we should give, but real quick before I sit back down, I want to tell you how we can give. We talked about the great day of service. We have all these different random acts of kindness we can do. We can pray for the victims of natural disasters. It's something that I wanted to share with y'all. I wanted to use this opportunity to quickly shout out Simple Charity. If you've ever heard of it, then you'll know where I'm taking this. But if you haven't, Simple Charity is something that I've had the blessing to be a part of for the last 3 years. It is an organization started by one of my friends, and ultimately its goal is to fight global poverty in the name of Jesus Christ. It's something that while we ask for donations and we have fundraisers that raise money for different organizations, for different people, projects around the world, for the poor, while we are asking for money, ultimately we could not do it without the prayer of our fellow students at either North Forsyth High School or all the different schools and chapters that we have. Service. If we have a car wash, people can give and give and give, but I can't do an entire car wash just myself. If people come in and provide their service, that ultimately makes it happen. So, with money, yes, it is important to give. It is important to look at ultimately what we do with our money, but also through service, through prayer, through love. That is the way that we can give part of ourselves for Christ, for salvation. So with Simple Charity, if you are interested in learning more about it, feel free to ask me after the service. Be glad to share. And if you want to either give or just learn more about the projects that we do, simplecharity.net is our website, and you can learn more about it. I know that lots of the youth ministry, people who go to North Forsyth High School with me have helped me out with it. It is a wonderful organization that has a wonderful amount of young people doing great things. So I just wanted to thank you guys for listening to me. I know that talking about money, listening to an 18-year-old come up here might be a little strange, but ultimately this instruction comes from Jesus. And if we put God on the throne of our lives, then we will ultimately reap the benefits later on. Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have wonderful youth or what? I invite you now to stand as we sing together verses 1 and 2 of hymn number 273.